I'm going to attempt to look at Project Cars 3 from 3 different perspectives. First, I'm taking a look at it from the perspective of the simulator that we were told that Ian Bell could not get enough of, as mentioned in 2018. Secondly, I'm going to look at Project Cars 3 as the successor to Project Cars 2, which is quite logical given the name. Thirdly, I'm going to look at this from the perspective of a racing game looking to find something different from the Gran Turismos, Forzas, Need for Speeds, etc. One of the biggest challenges for me is that I wanted to go into this with an open mind. This was a racing game, allegedly not being marketed towards people like me, but marketed towards the people who were looking to find something different outside of Forza Motorsport and Gran Turismo. They were looking to be the middle ground between the grids and Project Gotham racings of the industry and the hardcore simulations, the Assetto Corsas, the iRacings, the R-Factors, and so on. These are the 3 demographics that I'm seeing Project Cars 3 trying to satisfy, and it's a weird blend of racing that comes off feeling a little like Jack of all trades, master of none. This title tries to be a racing game, but gimps the racing. It tries to be a car culture title, but limits the customization. It tries to market to their new demographic, but really offers next to nothing new on the table, and it just makes me wonder, why? Why pump this title out just a few months ahead of a new console generation? Why cut out the majority of what made your racing series enjoyable, especially since it runs on largely the same engine as the more well-received predecessor? Now, I don't have the answer to all of these questions, but for me, Project Cars 3 is a total hot mess, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on it. So, let's jump into this convoluted train wreck of a racing game.
I'm done playing. Let's drive.
For my testing of Project Cars 3, I tested with a coupled sim racing setups as well as a little driving on the gamepad on 2 different PCs that I have. I've tested out triple screen support, 1080p driving, virtual reality, as well as an ultra-wide high refresh rate setup. And I'll start off on a positive. This is smooth. Project Cars has always been known as a looker and was marketed as one of the better sim racing titles. I can achieve pretty solid frame rates on my RTX 2070 with my i7 7700K at 3440 by 1440 maximum settings, which is pretty awesome. The Project Cars series has some of the best implementation of virtual reality, and this iteration is no exception. I can get great performance and it feels quite immersive. Triple screen is also pretty well implemented with individual settings to tweak to get the right angles on your setup. However, there is an issue I'm aware of at this time of filming that is causing certain sim racers to have issues setting up triples. So in the future, I'm hoping a software update will fix that, but time will tell. Ultimately, Project Cars 3 is a solid looking racing title, but it seemingly looks like it has taken a step back in other ways. Textures and aesthetics are lower resolution and seem to be more along the lines of a Need for Speed Shift title rather than Project Cars. Tracks are littered with showboaty trackside objects that stick out like a sore thumb. I thought Slightly Mad Studios learned their lesson when it came to these. Grass and track textures seem to be lower quality, which I'm wondering could be because Project Cars 3 is more catered towards consoles. Project Cars 3 is a visually impressive title, but it is no longer the best looking sim racing title thanks to titles such as Gran Turismo Sport, Assetto Corsa Competizione, and even Automobilista 2 looking like visually superior titles. It's a questionable step back, but it still performs well even on mid-range hardware, so that's a plus. Unfortunately, when you look past the shiny-ish exterior, things start to fall apart faster than Jeremy Clarkson can roll over a Reliant Robin. When you start to look at the actual content that is featured in Project Cars 3, it starts to seem like Slightly Mad Studios has cut out some of the best features and elements in order to shell out a simplistic driving title. Project Cars 3 features over 200 cars, which sounds impressive, but when Project Cars 2 had roughly 180 cars at launch, seeing over 100 cars added? Seeing only 20 new vehicles added is rather disappointing. Also worth mentioning is that certain vehicles like the F1 style Formula A car as well as go-karts are now removed from the series. We do get a trophy truck though, which is pretty cool. The track situation is actually a little worse than its predecessor. Project Cars 2 featured 52 tracks at launch, with Project Cars 3 dropping down to 49. Marquee circuits such as Spa and Le Mans have been removed, with other circuits such as Fiorano and Mugello being added. We also see a wider adoption of fictional racing circuits, catering more towards the Gran Turismo style fictional circuits. Ultimately, I find them rather forgettable, with nothing that really stood out to me. So, with less cars on tracks, they must have really focused on the nitty-gritty reality of racing, right? Well, not really. The racing experience in Project Cars 3 is rather poor, even by arcade racing standards. The artificial intelligence is laughably inconsistent, with some races having you blow by the opponents and end with a 5-second lead, or you'll get utterly freight trained by the AI, who are clearly running in their own world and have no issue with running you off the track. In some races, you'll have to deal with both, as Project Cars 3 will throw you into some horribly unbalanced races where you'll see GTE cars racing against GT3 cars, as well as concept hypercars that will blow right past you in the straights, but essentially die in the corners. Note that the majority of racing footage seen in this review is with the hard difficulty, but AI is also unreasonably difficult at medium, unless you are comfortable ramming cars out of the way. And the thing is, this is a racing title that will encourage that behavior. Gone are the warnings for unsportsmanlike driving or even mechanical damage. Those are not needed in Project Cars 3. You can kamikaze into a whole field of cars and be just fine, maybe with some visual damage. There are actually no ways to turn off visual damage or enable mechanical damage, which now puts Project Cars 3 behind competitors such as Gran Turismo and Forza, which at least give you the option to turn them on. All of this could have been forgiven if the driving feel was solid. This could actually turn out to be a decent driving experience, right? Well, the surprisingly consistent and competent driving model is utterly betrayed by killing off some of the most essential elements of a driving title. Before we get to the bad, let's talk about what Project Cars 3 actually does right. The sense of weight shifting is the best it's ever been, with the cars feeling slightly better connected to the track versus the floating nature of Project Cars 1 or 2. The feeling at the edge of grip is also pretty darn good, giving you an idea on what the car's doing. The force feedback feels a little better out of the box as well, both with my SimiCube 2 Pro as well as my Thrustmaster TSPC Racer that I tested it out with. Gamepad handling is okay, a little better, but not to the caliber of revolutionary as it was touted as being. Now that the positives are out of the way, brace yourself guys, it's going to be a doozy. You will never experience fuel consumption or tire wear in Project Cars 3, and now custom setup slots are being hidden behind an in-game currency, with a few generic setups being provided, which is nice to see at least. However, the game somewhat discourages you from using custom setups because they got rid of the return to garage screen on the free practice session, forcing you to restart your session every time you want to change things around. Also, the free practice session is hidden behind a convoluted menu system, forcing you to dig and hunt for the features and places you wouldn't think they'd be in. It seems like Slightly Mad Studios is going out of their way to create a simplified driving experience, but in turn is neutering the elements of their series that made the series rather enjoyable. Talking about neutered features, let's talk about that tire model. The Seda tire model that was marketed ever since Project Cars 1? Yep, that's basically thrown into garbage. You have no choice for tire compound, pressures, or any of that unnecessary baggage. You are on magic tires now that will change between dry and wet tires on the fly. No wearing out, no heating up. It's just a shame. That tire model had some great potential, but now it's just totally scrapped. Speaking of revolutionary features that have fallen by the wayside, let's talk about Live Track and Project Cars 3 handling of weather. In Project Cars 2, it was pretty awesome. You could set up the weather, change the date, and even have snow. In this latest release, you can only paint in broad strokes now, setting the general season, starting weather, ending weather, and track saturation of water. Now, that sounds like a decent variety, but compared to the wealth of adjustability Project Cars 2, a racing game on the same engine offered, it's a major step back. And a major step backwards is the way I would sum up Project Cars 3. Even the career mode, which was pretty cool in Project Cars 2, has been gutted for Project Cars 3. It's a somewhat generic, run races, soup up your car, and race style career. There's no real racing ladder for you to climb anymore. You just earn your money, buy your cars, and race. Now, that would be nice and all for racers, but it just doesn't offer anything to the table that makes me want to go back. So, before we get to my final thoughts, I'm going to get to my pros and cons, and grab some popcorn. It's going to take a while. So let's start off with the pros. Solid diversity of monitor and virtual reality configurations. Decent driving model that's a step above Project Cars 2 in some ways. And now let's get on to the cons. No mechanical damage. Inconsistent artificial intelligence and difficulty. Weird car classes. Abandonment of the SETA tire model. No fuel consumption. Pit stops removed from title. Graphics are starting to show their age. Poor quality tracks with glaring added structures. Mostly rehashed car list, including some removals of fan favorite cars. Limited car customization. Reduced track roster, including more fan favorites that have been cut out. 99 lap race limit. Confusing menu, especially for car and session selection. Discourages tweaking car setups. Doesn't offer anything new to the table versus its competitors. Weather and live track functionality have been stripped down horribly. A mix of a too harsh and yet too lenient penalty system. And here's an honorable mention: deceptive marketing. So let's get on to my closing thoughts, and this is a tough one, because I really wanted Project Cars 3 to be good. Ever since I first heard about Project Cars 3 in January of 2017, when I heard Rod Chong tell me about the plans for the future, I was getting a little excited. When Project Cars 2 was released, I was disappointed, but optimistic because I knew there were big things in store, and I knew about what DLC could do. A couple years later, we hear about the announcement that Project Cars 3 is in development, as well as Slightly Mad Studios announcing the Mad Box, a true next-generation console. A lot of us were thinking Slightly Mad Studios had bit off a little more than they could chew, but hey, go big or go home, right? In the year and a half since Project Cars 3's announcement, it's been a total roller coaster. They were bought twice, once by Modern Pick and the second time by Codemasters. They were getting sued over the name Madbox, and the console was basically never heard from again. They also even got the rights to make a Fast and the Furious game, which features a series that's almost as wild and crazy as the studio that helped develop it. And now, we get Project Cars 3, a title that literally means community-assisted racing simulation has abandoned nearly every value that the series holds onto. It abandoned their core community to try to catch a bigger fish, so there goes the community assisted. They also cut out the racing simulation, cutting out a revolutionary tire model and even pit stops. While doing that, they created a game that their engine seemingly isn't designed for, and it creates this weird middle ground that ends up just feeling disappointing. They've removed features that could have just simply been turned on or off. I'd like to say Slightly Mad Studios did the bare minimum to justify a Project Cars 3, but when you look at it, it seems like every decision was cold, calculated, and deliberate. All of this mediocre is wrapped up in a surprisingly polished exterior that shows Slightly Mad Studios is capable of making a solid racing simulation. Ultimately, I just don't get it. I just don't get why they're going back to making what could be seen as polished shovelware that is piggybacking off of its unrefined but still pretty good predecessor. This feels like a slap in the face to everybody who supported them over the last decade, but at the same time is also an insult for people looking for something other than Gran Turismo or Forza. Bottom line, unless you're really wanting specific cars or tracks that are specifically in Project Cars 3, I see no reason to buy Project Cars 3. I especially see no reason to spend $90 on the deluxe edition like I foolishly did. This offers nothing Project Cars 2 doesn't have, except maybe the Corvette C8R. The driving experience is marginally better, but nowhere near what we have as competition. Heck, I'd even recommend Forza or Gran Turismo over this. So I'm going to end on this question. If you're looking for something specific, what title would I recommend? For the hardcore sim racer, I'm going to recommend Automobilista 2. It runs on the same game engine and features better physics, exciting cars, and also pit stops. Who would have thought in 2020 a track racing video game would need to have pit stops as a feature? For someone looking to get into sim racing, how about a good classic? Check out GTR 2, an awesome older racing simulation that shows you what Ian Bell and Slightly Mad Studios were capable of in the mid-2000s. I think that, for a fraction of the price, you could learn a lot more. Sure, you're going to miss out on the newer cars, but you could get a much better racing experience. It's also light on system resources, so even a low-end computer can run it. For someone looking for a solid console racer, Gran Turismo and Forza have officially surpassed Project Cars in terms of realism. If you're on the consoles, those would offer a better experience in my opinion. So those are my recommendations on what to get instead of Project Cars 3. If you think I'm full of crap, you can find a link to the game in the description below. But just don't tell me I didn't warn you. So, what are your thoughts on Slightly Mad Studios' latest racing game? Wait, not that one. This one. Funny thinking how they were released a month apart, but hey, gotta earn that paycheck somehow. Well, anyways, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Did you give this a go? Or did you get a refund like Random Call Sign? Let us know in the comments below. Also, if you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to help keep us on track. For the Sim Racing Paddock, I'm William Marsh, and thanks for watching.